This is Delhi. Please stand by for our next program. This is All India Radio. In commemoration of International Water Day, in the national program of talks tonight, we bring you a panel discussion entitled Every Drop Counts. The panelists are Dr. C.R. Babu, Professor Emeritus, Center for Management of Degraded Ecosystems, Delhi University; Mriganka Saxena, Leading Urban Strategist; Nitin Bassi, Senior Program Lead, Center for Energy, Environment and Water; and Vikram Bahel, Media Personality, who initiates and moderates the discussion.
Welcome to the National Program of Talks. Tonight, in commemoration of World Water Day, we're going to talk about how every drop counts. We're going to look about and see how water can be conserved and how the future is going to look, especially for urban and rural India. My guests today are Mriganka Saxena, who is an architect and an urban strategist; Nitin Bassi, who's the program lead at CEEW, which is the Council for Energy, Environment and Water; and Professor Dr. C.R. Babu, Professor Emeritus, CEMDE. To start off with, Professor Babu, let me ask you, how serious is the problem today of water in India?
So let me tell you, sir, very briefly. In biosphere, water is finite in amount, but it is abundant. It is recycled because the amount of water is finite. And recycling involves simply evaporation of water into water vapor, which will be condensed into droplets of rain, ice or snow, which will fall onto the ground as precipitation.
And then get reabsorbed. Absolutely.
And now this cycle is what is known as hydrological cycle, which plays a very critical role in setting up the weather patterns across the globe, including monsoon. Now, it is this monsoon water, ice or snow, that is the source of water for all the terrestrial communities in the biosphere, where man-dominated landscapes altering the hydrological cycle in such a way that the weather patterns are altered, also contributing acute scarcity of water.
Yes.
Because of the failure of monsoons.
Right.
And because of reduction in the stream flows, and because of the destruction of the wetlands, because of concretization of the surface, which does not allow recharging of the groundwater.
Mriganka, how do you see the current situation? How bad is it?
I think all Indian cities are heading towards a major water crisis. There is a water crisis ongoing, and it's only going to exacerbate looking at the rates of urbanization that we're dealing with. Currently, we're just at the cusp of urbanization. By 2050, about 814 million people would be living in Indian cities across 7,300 different urban centers. A Niti Aayog report says that by 2030, urban water deficit would start at half of what the demand would be. So we are really heading the wrong way. I would say that gives us sort of the numbers. All our water bodies, all our natural water resources are degrading. Our mismanagement of water, ironically, is creating both water scarcity and urban flooding. Right? So, I mean, there are multiple things. Our infrastructure is not in place. While there are programs which are being, initiated as we speak, but there are issues, larger issues of mismanagement, which is leading us to where we are.
Nitin, let me ask you about how you see this problem being tackled, especially on the policy front. The government, of course, is looking at certain policies and has come up with certain initiatives. How do you see the programs now?
I will like to divide this debate in two contexts. One is the urban areas and then the rural areas. So if we see the urban areas, you will find most of the cities, because they have already consumed, the water resource endowment in their part. So you take example of Delhi, you take example of Bangalore, you take example of Jaipur. They all are dependent on water supply from outside their state, respective state. And sometimes the water is coming from far away catchments. I mean, Delhi gets its water from, some reservoirs which are based outside Delhi, and then it is conveyed here. If I talk about rural areas, the problem in rural areas is about the access to water. Now, government has come up with Jal Jeevan Mission, which intends to actually, give every household a tap connection within their premises. But again, the problem would be from where the water will come. Now, most of the rural water supply is based on groundwater. Unfortunately, 2/3 of our country is occupied by hard rocks. So there you don't have groundwater which lasts for full year. So during summer season, you might have heard, problems in Maharashtra or in South Indian states that they have to depend on imported water. They have to depend on these water trains. So there, the situation is the groundwater needs to be supplemented by surface water so that those people also get access to year-round water supply.
Professor Babu, the one thing that has been talked about a great deal has been water harvesting. How do you see the situation with water harvesting today? Do you think enough is being done, or do you think more needs to be done?
I would like to say that we need to conserve water if we want to adhere to that every droplet counts. What are the ways by which we conserve the water? First one is wise use of water resources. Second is rainwater harvesting. Third is restoration of wetlands. Fourth is rejuvenation of our dead rivers or whatever, the rivers which are highly degraded, polluted. And lastly, we need to resource conservation. The government as well as the public have been working on this aspect and carried out on a large scale. But I must tell you, most of the water harvesting structures developed across the country are dysfunctional. They get silted and covered with a lot of plastics and covered with a lot of debris, and with the result, the water again, moves across the surface.
Very important point. Let me bring in Mriganka here, because you are a specialist in urban strategy when it comes to water, and silting and garbage going into systems does cause a problem. What is the way around this?
So you've touched upon one of the issues that comes to urban strategy when it comes to water. So that definitely is a massive issue when it comes to municipal governance. So urban local bodies that are responsible for how drains are maintained. And these are small stormwater drains, not even going to large natural drains that we're talking about. That leads to a bigger question of mandates and responsibilities, frankly. I see the problem arising there in that domain where water has been compartmentalized over decades into so many different silos, different types of water. There's potable, there's waste, there's underground, there's storm, there's rain, all of it coming together. But at the end of the day, it's one water. The minute we start dividing them into silos, we get different departments and agencies. These departments and agencies each has a separate mandate, if at all, right, for conserving water or otherwise, which also means that budgetary allocations, budgetary priorities, etc., do not align for a comprehensive, integrated strategy for urban water management. And I think that's where our cities need to move towards. It's integrated urban water management, a globally accepted way of moving ahead, RUWM, and looking at how management across departments and agencies can be aligned under that larger umbrella of thinking. And that's where the urban strategy needs to come forward.
And I want to bring in Naveen. So where are we going to get the money from? Is it a private sector or a hybrid between government and private? And what would be the incentive for the private sector to do this? And how do you manage it? How do you control it? What's your view on that?
First of all, let me tell you, what are those issues where we can think of, private resources and public resources. Mm-hmm. Now, if we look at the urban water management issues, the first thing is unaccounted for water. So in most of the Indian cities, the unaccounted for water, which is the water which is lost while it is supplied, and also which is consumed through unbilled consumption. So that amounts to at least 40 to 60% across Indian cities. So we need to plug this up. We need to, have a proper metering in place, both at the household level and at the system level itself. The other problem is, at the level at which water is currently priced. So most of the, cities again, they are not able to cover even the operation and maintenance part of water production. The third aspect I would like to bring in is about the reuse of treated wastewater. As per the Central Pollution Control Board estimates, in India, from cities, at least 70,000 million liters of wastewater is generated. We have capacity to treat around 50% of it. So even if 50% is treated, we have about 35 million liters of water which is available, which can be put to reuse. Now I will come to your question on from where the investment would come. I would say when it is about fixing up the gaps, fixing up the losses, it is where the public agencies have to get engaged. Of course, the private operators can play a role in coming out with some innovative solutions. Suppose if I want to know, okay, which is the latest software, which is the latest way of doing metering that can take care of additional human resources requirement. So this is where the private operators, they have to come up. They have to come up with the technological innovations which can be tried in the water supply system. Now, treating wastewater, there is a need to construct more sewage treatment plants. And at present, as far as my knowledge goes, government is looking for cost efficient systems, such sewage treatment plants which can operate with energy as a constraint, land as a constraint, and also human resources as a constraint. So this is where the private operators have to come up with the technological innovations and showcase it how it can be done across cities.
Well, private operators would come in if they see profit. So, do you see, if I may bring you in here, Mriganka, any opportunities now for the private sector to get involved in more than just conservation, but in also perhaps actively playing a role in water, let's say, as he just said, reclamation or treatment, and also in the larger ecosystem? Do you see business opportunities that may exist from a planning point of view? Where do you see them?
I do actually. Over the last sort of 10 years, I've seen the narrative change. So more recently, I've seen a lot of community groups, NGOs, working with CSR money in trying to restore drains and water bodies and going to the larger sort of ecological systems. It's not only restricted to water bodies, it could be landscapes and it could be ecologically sensitive areas. Because the CSR initiative is getting the money in, that's just one of the ways of doing that. However, there is a ground movement where people are getting more interested, they're getting more aware, they're also asking for more accountability from the government agencies. Where I see an issue though is in getting permissions, right? So while there is interest, while money may be aligned, may not be a problem to get the money, you might even get the buy-in from the private sector. How do you get access to a water body that is owned by XYZ agency? Would you be permitted to come and work there, right? This is where the challenge lies. And there are two sides of the story. It cannot become a liability for the private sector to go ahead and restore these. There are other, the local public is involved, etc. So I see where the concerns from the government agencies come in giving permissions. But a system where the two can work together is actually important, because that's the only way I feel you can scale up across the country. The government agencies in themselves do not have the bandwidth right now to go about restoring drains, restoring water bodies. We need the public to come in and step in. But they need to be facilitated, and that enabling platform has to be created for that to happen.
Professor Babu, the ideal situation would be 24/7 water available on tap, and it should be portable. So you should be able to drink off the tap. Do you see that happen soon in our urban cities?
Possible.
How possible and how soon?
Take, for example, Sir, Delhi. Delhi's water requirement is about 1,260 million gallons per day. But the supply from all sources to Delhi is just only 915 million gallons per day. The shortfall is about 325 million gallons per day. Here comes the wise use of water. Was there about a barrage during floods? Something like 40,000 to 3 lakhs million gallons of water is discharged, floodwaters. And these waters will straight away go into Bay of Bengal. Now, is it possible to impound this floodwater? We calculated we can impound 3,699 million gallons of floodwater every year.
But how?
In the reservoirs, which
right.
are created in the upstream of Wazirabad along the floodplains of the Yamuna River. I don't need any additional space.
So that's where you feel a solution lies, that the floodplains need to be redeveloped into reservoirs.
Yes.
And perhaps some of them were natural lakes in the past,
Yes.
which have disappeared.
Yes.
And we bring that back. That's a
Yes.
very good point, Mr. Babu.
Now, I just want to add one more point
Yes,
here,
please.
sir.
Yes, please.
If we can create off-river mini reservoirs outside the floodplain, just outside the floodplain, along the bunds, you can not only store floodwater, but also generate electricity, because they're open reservoirs at the top. And then, as we have rightly pointed out, that the floodplains have water bodies. They're called wetlands. And these wetlands store usually enormous amount of floodwater, but that's silted. If you can desilt it, you can store huge amount of floodwater, and that water would meet the gap in the lean season to Delhi and Delhi will have probably plenty of water, and instead of bottles, you may use tap for taking water.
From a micro point of view, water is also very important for not just humans, but for birds and animals and everybody who needs to live, because I think it's second only to air. Keeping that in mind, how do you see the situation on a more micro level today with the ecosystem, and especially when it comes to birds? We've also heard about how sparrows have reduced in Delhi. Many other cities are having changes in patterns of animals and birds because of the water changes. So where do you see this heading? And do you think, Nitin, enough is being done to look at not just the human side of water consumption for human beings, but also for animals and birds?
Well, you bring in a very important aspect to this whole discussion about the multiple use of a water body. I mean, what we say, and it involves the various services and benefits a particular water body. Professor Babu call them wetlands. So they bring in. Now I will just try to give example again, because it is like that we are kind of a more experienced with the situation in Delhi, that what is happening to those water bodies in the urban setup. So every time the examples from Delhi surface in Delhi, as per the records, there were more than 1,000 water bodies, including wetlands. Now, what has happened to these wetlands? I mean, Delhi was in a unique, kind of a, geographical location, on the alluvial floodplains. Over the years, as cities started growing, construction activities grew, economy grew, industry grew, these water bodies were encroached upon. Many of these were encroached upon. At present, Delhi government is struggling to find 200 of those water bodies which are listed. There are wetland rules in place for each state. A wetland authority has been created in Delhi. Still, it is unable to notify even a one wetland. And why I'm saying notify? Because it provides legal protection to that water body. Unless and until we get serious, on the governance aspect of it, on the regulatory aspect of it, unfortunately, those multiple use system or the multiple use benefit and services provided by the water bodies are just going down the hill, and they will never be revived unless and until we really get strong, we really get politically strong, and there is a political will, to save these, whatever water bodies are left. I'm giving an example of Delhi, but the situation is not far away from what we found here in other cities of India.
Riganka, what's your opinion if we break that down to an even more micro level and bring it down to the individual? What is your suggestion to help the environment, or the ecosystem, should I say, with birds and animals? But is it enough if, let's say, enough happens, and if large numbers of people put out a bird bath everywhere they can, would it help?
The quick answer is no. There are cities in UK which have been following this whole agenda of urban ecology. And it happens, but it happens at a neighborhood level at the minimum. In cities like ours, we need to do a lot more strategically, I would feel, not taking away from what can happen on a one-to-one basis, and people who are interested tend to do that. And that's fine. But I think we need a few more larger steps. Also, from a planning perspective, I feel the idea of the blue-green network, and these are terminologies that are coming up very often now in the urban planning, urban domain, that's something that really needs to be looked at, which is essentially looking at our green spaces and looking at our blue networks strategically at the city level. So all of it becomes a part of one integrated system, the green and the blue. Only when our cities start working that way can we start thinking about the ecology holistically, I feel. And it is then when the smaller sort of initiatives will start adding up. But in the absence of the larger push, I think a lot more would need to be done.
Professor Babu, is enough being done for the animals and the birds, in your view?
Not much. First, the humans are selfish, so therefore their needs must be met, and therefore everything is tilted towards the human being, and the animals and will come later. And in fact, in this scenario, the plants come last, because the plants are not directly related to animal systems or the human beings, and animals are still closer to human beings. So therefore, we need to bring that concept of ecosystem when you talk about the conservation of water. And then only we'll be able to achieve that we can also conserve the water, not only for human beings, but also for our other species that found in the biosphere.
Nitin, if I were to now do a round with all three of you and ask you, what is the one thing that you see as the most important immediate initiative that needs to be taken? what would you suggest?
I would say stop all illegal groundwater pumping in urban cities.
Professor Babu?
We need to conserve our natural resources from which water is derived. That is rivers, the wetlands, and also recycling of wastewater and reuse it should be given top priority. That's one way by which we can, able to address the problem of water scarcity.
Mriganka, what do you say? What would be the one thing you would like to put forth?
I would like every Indian city to start preparing water master plans. And this is water master plans which look at all types of water as one, looking at water as a closed loop resource. And once we get that, give it the statutory backing so that all planning initiatives in the city get aligned to that water master plan. And the two statutory plans, the water master plan and the city master plan or the city development plan, work in tandem.
And if we were to look at this at a personal level, I understand that there's been a lot of talk recently about how water is wasted without us even knowing it. For example, when you shave, if you leave the tap running, then you waste a lot of water. You should actually use a mug or a glass or something to wash your razor in. The same is with brushing your teeth. One leaky faucet can cause a whole tank of water to drain out overnight. So when you look at this in a community system, and if there are a number of faucets leaking in a certain area, you have a huge amount of wastage. Nitin, how do you think we should address this? How can we educate people to understand that even a drop dripping through the tap will eventually in a year amount to a lot?
This is a very important point that we have to ensure that the water usage at the household level also become efficient. Now, there are very simple things, which have been done, like, earlier the commodes. I mean, they used to, those commodes used to take, at least 40 to 50 liters of water in one flush. And now that amount has significantly reduced because of the, the efficient system or, the changes to the design of itself. Now, coming to the point of, what actually get wasted at the household level. Now, let me also bring in one very important point here, that we also need to estimate what exactly the amount of water wastage. Now, it won't be correct to say that if 100 liters of water is supplied to household, all of it gets consumed. It never happens like that. Out of that 100 liters, 20% actually gets consumed and 80% of that water returns to your system. Now, the water which is returning to the system is basically a wastewater. Now, that wastewater, if it is not captured, not treated, it will go to your rivers and it will pollute them. So effort along with, promoting those efficiency in the household level, effort should also be to tap that wastewater, treat it, and then, whether you want to, if there is a demand for it, reuse it. If there is no demand for it, you actually drain it back to the system. I mean, these two things have to go parallelly.
Mriganka, do you think enough is being done to educate people on this as to how they can conserve? What would be the wastage? Or do you think something can be done now? I don't want to say enforce, because you can't really go into somebody's home and check whether his tap is leaking or not, or how is he shaving. It has to come from within. People have to learn. So how do you actually bring that about?
A lot has been done in terms of communication strategies, etc., but it's never enough. So I think that's something that must carry on a regular basis, I feel. One quick thing that I felt looking at sort of societies that have developed elsewhere in the NCR, prepaid meters seems to make people very aware very quickly. So you put in the money before, and the minute you see the water bill sort of, finishing, you know how much you've consumed. I think it's a quick way of making people aware of what their consumption levels are. It could be for both energy and water, but it's just changing the consumption patterns. It's a simple thing, but I think it'll be quite effective.
Professor Babu, do you think the economic angle, what Mriganka just mentioned, it would be sufficient, or do you think something more is required to be done to educate consumers on how to save water and how to not waste water?
If we want to implement what we have been advocating at the micro level, I don't think that money is an important matter. It is the commitment. It is the realization that we need to conserve these resources. Otherwise, the resource will become depleted. That is lacking, and we must inculcate this concept at the household level, as Nitin says, is very, very critical in the conservation of water.
But Professor Babu, it's already being done at schools. It's being taught at schools. It is being, in fact, Nitin said, and it was already mentioned, that a lot has been done. What more can be done for educating people in this area?
We have been talking on a blackboard, but we must only take to the field and to the ground level. And
That's a very good point.
Yes.
So have field visits.
Just field visit and
Right.
see what is happening.
Right. Interesting point.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick final round, and I'm going to start with you, Riganka. Are you optimistic about the future when it comes to water?
Absolutely optimistic. One just needs to be, because there's no other way. It's not rocket science. It can be done, just that a lot of people need to work together to make it happen. Absolutely optimistic.
And a lot of people in the past said that the next world war will be fought over water. There's going to be such a shortage. Is that something that is a matter of concern for you?
I think there is a possibility. Land and water are the two most scarce resources, and that's what's going to become the asset that people are going to fight for.
Nitin, optimistic or not?
Yes, very much. I mean, I could see that a lot of effort has been already put in by the scientific community, by the government, and other stakeholders. When I say other stakeholder, it is the corporates who are also putting in a lot of their CSR funds, to revive, various, for various water conservation and water management practices. The only thing is that we need to get little more systematic. Till now, water remains as a state subject. So whenever it comes to development of water resources, the states, they take the lead. But water, it doesn't know boundaries. So in a basin, when we talk about a river basin, so there may be 4 to 5 different states. It is not one state who should take the decision. So if that thing can be sorted out, we move towards more, in a direction of basin planning rather than planning at state level. I think a lot more can be achieved. And the question about, the wars, whether those wars will happen, I think we can avoid those.
Professor Babu.
I must tell you, sir, we need a massive movement. And that movement would be just like what Mahatma Gandhi carried out a movement against colonial regime. We need to have that movement. And in that movement, people's participation is very, very important. In the absence of people's participation, everything would be optimistic. And until we have that, we will not be able to address the issue of water scarcity at the global level as well as at the Indian level.
Well, from my side, all I'd like to say is that I hope all the listeners do their little bit of conserving water, trying to find ways and means of preserving this resource, and also looking after the birds and animals who, in our urban environment, sometimes find it very, very difficult to even get water to drink. All one has to do really is step out on a hot Delhi day and not carry your wallet, and you'll find that it's a very unwelcoming situation if you need water to drink. So thank you so much, Riganka, Nitin, Professor Babu. Thank you for your time.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in. Good night.
In commemoration of International Water Day, in the National Programme of Talks tonight, you just heard a panel discussion entitled Every Drop Counts. The panelists were Dr. C.R. Babu, Professor Emeritus, Centre for Management of Degraded Ecosystems, Delhi University; Mriganka Saxena, Leading Urban Strategist; Nitin Bassi, Senior Programme Lead, Centre for Energy, Environment and Water; and Vikram Behel, Media Personality, who initiated and moderated the discussion. Produced and presented by Naveen Gupta of AIR Delhi, this program came to you from the Delhi station of All India Radio.